Hey everyone, welcome back to part 5 of Sooke Exposed Local Entitlement. And you may remember back in part 4 I exposed Leslie, the Sooke googan, as a fish poacher, where he posted pictures on his Facebook page of him and his family bait fishing in lizard and fairy lakes, which is unlawful. Well, too funny. Shortly after I posted that video, he did it again. Dumbass googan. Now today's video is all about Leslie going to court and pleading guilty to assault with a weapon. And I'm just going to read this court transcript straight from my voice. By the way, this transcript cost me $200 to bring to you. So yes, a court transcript does cost $200, but the price of exposing corruption, priceless. So I'm just going to read out loud the most relevant parts of the transcript, but if you want to read the whole thing, you can just stop and pause it and read it yourself. And for those of you that don't know, this does take place in Canada, Victoria, British Columbia, Canada, namely. And in Canada, the prosecutors are referred to as the Crown. And when an accused person is facing criminal charges, it's not the people versus the accused, it's the initial R versus the accused. Up until recently, it was Regina versus the accused, but it's now been recently changed to Rex versus the accused. And this is because the Canadian legal system is largely based off the United Kingdom's legal system. So Regina used to be the Queen. Rex is now the king. So yes, it's the King of England versus the accused. So when you hear someone referring to the Crown, that's the prosecutor who is representing the King of England. I know it's weird, but that's how we do it. Now, this is kind of awkward because the local Crown office and the one next to the jurisdiction of my local Crown office, they can't prosecute me and they can't represent me as a victim because I'm a conflict of interest to their offices due to my YouTube channel, in where I have published videos exposing them of the actual crimes that they commit in court. So the prosecutor, they had to pull a guy out of retirement to represent me as a victim. And this guy's name is Oleh. Kuzma. He's a very experienced prosecutor in Canada. And those of you that know how criminal court works, you'll know very experienced prosecutors are very good at it. And you're going to see in this video just how good he is. And you may remember in previous parts of this series that Leslie actually applied for legal aid because according to him, he can't afford a lawyer. And I don't know for a fact if he qualified for legal aid, but he did come to court with a lawyer. So I'm just going to assume that he's using the taxpayers' money to pay for this lawyer instead of paying it out of his own pocket for his own stupidity. Nice, eh? So here's the beginning of the court transcript where the lawyers introduce themselves to the judge. The judge is Judge Gouge. A judge I've been before a few times. He's very old. He looks very old. He sounds very old. He acts very old. Oh boy, are you guys in for a treat? So I'm going to start reading you the opening submissions for the Crown, the prosecutor here. He says, thank you, Your Honor. The circumstances giving rise to the charge before the court are these: that on Tuesday, August 9th of 2022, the complainant, Dan, was fishing off the shore in front of a property in Sooke, British Columbia. The matters about which I'm going to describe were all video, shot on video. Dan was wearing a GoPro camera that was operating during this entire time. At around 6:27 p.m., a dark pontoon boat came into Dan's line of sight. At Dan's commented to himself, I guess, quote, always got to be some idiot that wants to be in the way, unquote. Now, I'm going to pause reading the transcript here for a sec because I thought this was very odd. Why is the prosecutor telling the judge what I was saying while talking to myself before this guy even was like within earshot of me? Now, I thought that was really odd. Why would this prosecutor tell the judge what I was saying to myself? Anyways, let's continue. At 6:29 p.m., he commented, quote, watch, I hook into a big fish, and this guy is going to be in the fucking way and snap it off for me, and that will be that. That will be the end of my season. Boom, over, unquote. And again, why is the prosecutor telling the judge about what I was saying, talking to myself before this guy even got in my way? Weird, eh? Anyways, let's get back to the transcript. The pontoon, which was being operated by Mr. Sparks, drifted closer towards Dan, who was on the shoreline. At 6:30 p.m., Dan said to Mr. Sparks, quote, fuck you doing? Might want to move there, bud. You're going to get hit. Bud, you're going to get hit, unquote. Dan was casting now, trying to fish. Mr. Sparks, in return, made a comment about Dan not hitting his boat and that he was drifting. Now, this is odd because I never heard that on the video, and I don't know how he's saying that because you couldn't hear that on the video. Anyways, let's get back to the transcript. Dan and Mr. Spark yelled back and forth, and that's not true either. That's not on the video anyways. At 6:32 p.m., Mr. Sparks went to shore, got out of his pontoon boat, said, "Fuck, cast that thing at my boat," which he did not say. He said, "Look, cast at me, hit my boat," which I interrupted him speaking at that point in the video, which if I hadn't, I'm sure he would have said, "I'll kick your ass." Anyways, back to the transcript. And Dan responded, quote, "I'm just letting you know you're right in my way," unquote. Dan and Mr. Sparks proceeded to bicker back and forth. Dan called Mr. Sparks a dumbass, unquote. That's not exactly what happened. At 6:32, and the next thing was Mr. Sparks picked up Dan's fishing net that was nearby and threw it into the water. Dan told Mr. Sparks that it was all on camera and that he wanted to get his fishing net. Mr. Sparks actually did go retrieve Dan's fishing net from the water and dropped it in front of Dan. That's not true. He threw it and got onto his pontoon boat and started leaving. Dan and Mr. Sparks proceeded to bicker back and forth. Hey, did you notice the fact that the prosecutor completely left out the fact that I was the only one that de-escalated this whole thing by trying to walk away from this crazy maniac? Yeah, you know the part in the video where I turned and walked away, I don't know, 30 to 50 feet just to get away from this guy? Totally left that out. A few minutes later, at 6:35 p.m., Mr. Sparks returned to the shore and approached Dan. Mr. Sparks told Dan that he's going to rip off his GoPro off Dan's chest. Kick his fucking ass. Mr. Sparks got in front of Dan, and Mr. Sparks put his left hand. Dan replied, "No, that he's not." Dan, at this point, punched Mr. Sparks. And Mr. Kuzma here has left out a lot of what actually happened because he didn't mention that Mr. Sparks had assaulted me after saying he was going to take my property, which in Canada, according to the Criminal Code of Canada, that would fall under robbery, under section 343, subsection C, which says, "Everyone commits robbery who assaults any person with intent to steal from him." So by him saying, "I'm going to rip the GoPro off your chest and then I'm going to kick your ass," that is a robbery as defined by the Criminal Code of Canada. Kind of odd that a prosecutor would leave that out. Back to the transcript, he says, Mr. Sparks said, quote, "You hit me first," unquote. And Dan kicked Mr. Sparks once, but Mr. Sparks kept coming. Dan pulled a knife. He says it was to defend himself from the larger Mr. Sparks. It was also to defend my property being stolen, which was a robbery. Mr. Sparks in turn picked up a log from the beach and hit Dan 3 times with the log, twice in the arm and once in the head. Dan landed in the water and called for help. At around 6:39 p.m., a lady by the name of heard Dan calling for help and called the police, and the police subsequently arrived and investigated. Dan attended the hospital, and he was found to have defensive wounds on his left forearm with contusions and an abrasion to his ulnar aspect. He had bruising on his left triceps and left upper back. He had a contusion to his left posterior auricular region overlying the temporal bone, but there was no evidence of underlying cranial injury. He also suffered some dizziness. Those are the circumstances, Your Honor. And then the Judge Gouge, the old judge who looks old, sounds old, and acts old, he says yes as he addresses the defense lawyer. "Mr. Drury, I'm concerned. I could imagine that the circumstances, as recited by Mr. Kuzma, might be described as a consensual fight." Okay, let's pause from the transcript for a sec here. So interrupting, interfering, and obstructing my lawful use of property, damaging my property, robbery, uttering threats, and assault with a weapon. Does that sound like a consensual fight while someone who's being attacked is backing up, yelling for help, and yelling, "Get back"? Does that sound like a consensual fight? Because this judge, after listening to the prosecutor do such a poor job of representing a victim, this judge is convinced that this is a consensual fight. And he's concerned, like, why are we even here in court over a consensual fight? That's how bad this prosecutor is. This is a highly, highly experienced prosecutor. And anyone with a shred of court experience knows that the prosecutor will go above and beyond for the victims that they're representing. I've heard someone once tell me that the prosecutor's job is to sling as much mud as possible and hope some of it sticks. Well, in this case, the prosecutor's not slinging any mud. If anything, he's slinging mud at me, the victim, by telling the judge what I said when I was talking to myself before this guy even showed up, and then completely leaving out the 2 counts of mischief, the robbery, and the uttering threats, which are 4 separate charges. This prosecutor is doing such a bad job that the judge is convinced that this is a consensual fight. Let's continue on, shall we? So the defense lawyer comes to my aid and he says, there may be one portion that's left out of that transcript of my friends, who he's talking about, the prosecutor. My friend, in just attempting to summarize it, left out. There is a video of this whole incident. Within this video, Dan is saying to Mr. Sparks, "Get away from me." You can hear that in the video. The judge is like, not convinced. And the defense lawyer says, and from my review of sort of the transcript that's been typed up from the video, and it is, well, Dan's, I'm told, and I think I recall this from the video, but retreats at one point up the shoreline in order to attempt to get away. And so that's in combination with what seems to be an act that's just really not proportional in the circumstances, is really why we're here, Your Honor. But my understanding from Mr. Sparks is that he is willing to admit that his actions were not proportionate. He went too far. But, and then the judge interrupts, "All right, Mr. Sparks, is what Mr. Kuzma said true?" And Leslie says, "It is." The judge says, "All right, you've had some advice from Mr. Drury, I take it?" "I have." "Do you wish to enter a guilty plea to a charge of assault with a weapon?" Leslie says, "I do." And then the judge asks him a few questions to confirm all this, because, the judge isn't convinced that this was assault with a weapon. The judge is convinced that this was a consensual fight. And this is really interesting in this next part of the transcript. The prosecutor steps up and he says to the judge, he goes, "2 things. 1, I have a copy of Mr. Sparks' criminal record." Judge says, "Thank you. For Your Honor, it seemed there are previous convictions. Although nothing since 2014, Mr. Sparks has been without any record since quite some period of time." Now, I'm just going to pause there for a sec on the transcript. And whenever I've been to court to watch court, the prosecutor always brings up the accused's criminal record and goes through every conviction. This guy just handed Leslie's pages-long criminal record, which I've already gone through in other videos, so I won't go through here again, and just hands it to the judge. But I've never seen a prosecutor do that before. The prosecutors always go through every single charge and make it clear to the judge what the accused person's past criminal record is. In this case, the prosecutor just handed a piece of paper and said, "It seemed there are previous convictions." It seemed there are previous convictions? No, dude, there's pages of previous convictions. Most of them have to do with violence. Whew, anyways. Let's continue, shall we? He says the other issue before the Crown makes its submissions is that this case, Dan is present. He's prepared a victim impact statement and wishes to read his victim statement to the court. And the lawyers and the judge go through some formalities about that. And then I read my victim impact statement, which I'm not going to read in this video. It's a little too personal, so we're just going to skip that for now. But I did make it clear to the judge that I have a lot of anxiety and stress about going back to this area. And I did mention that a lot of my clothing was either destroyed or lost or not returned, and that my fishing reel had been broken by Mr. Sparks. I made that clear. And after I'm finished reading my victim impact statement, the prosecutor jumps back in and he says, "Yes, Your Honor, in the circumstances and Mr. Sparks' record, albeit dated, the Crown is suggesting a conditional sentence order in the range of 30 to 45 days, following which the Crown requests a probation order for 1 year. The terms and conditions of the conditional sentence order would be 30 to 45 days that," and then they briefly discussed Mr. Sparks reporting to his probation supervisor. And the prosecutor says, with respect to curfew, house arrest, the suggested hours after consultation with my friend, and in order to allow Mr. Sparks to keep gainfully employed, we're suggesting a curfew between the hours of 9:30 in the evening and 5:30 in the morning. And I was kind of shocked at this because I was like, is this his sentence? Curfew? Really? 9:30 in the evening to 5:30 in the morning? So once he's had dinner and gotten drunk and is ready to go to bed, he can, that's the overnight hours that he's actually asleep. He can't leave his house. That's his punishment. and they're going to chalk this up between 30 or 45 days. That's really? They're trying to kill me? Okay, so there's a bit of back and forth here about the time, because apparently he has to get up at 4:30 in the morning or 4:45. He leaves his house at 4:45 in the morning, so they changed it from 9:30 p.m. to 4:30 a.m. So he has to be in his house from 9:30 p.m. to 4:30 a.m. Yeah, and then the lawyers and the judge discuss, the circumstances where that wouldn't apply. So, if he has a heart attack in the middle of the night and he needs needs an ambulance, he's going to have to go to the hospital at, say 3 in the morning. Well, this curfew won't apply for that, right? Which makes sense. So let's get back into the relevant part of the transcript here, where the defense lawyer says it's never been set for trial. Mr. Sparks' contemplation all along was that he wanted to take responsibility for what he said was just going too far in the circumstances. So it is an early guilty plea, Your Honor. It's a public acknowledgement of his wrongdoing. It's a public admission. And in speaking with him about this, the circumstances before the court, he's aware and he's mindful of the fact that at any point he could have simply walked away. He could, or taken his boat and made his way in the other direction from Dan. He chose not to do that. He chose to come to shore and confront Dan. Wow, let's pause from the transcript for a bit. Wow, so the defense lawyer for the accused who tried to kill me is the only guy standing up for me and defending me. Wow, holy shit. Wow, this defense lawyer has done more for me as a victim than the prosecutor has. Wow. Let's continue on, shall we? So the defense lawyer says, I can tell you that he is working full time. He is the sole provider for his family. He is residing in Sooke at 2615 Otter Point Road, Your Honor. He has a mortgage there on a mobile home. He has a pad rent that he has to pay month to month, Your Honor. Can perhaps see he's wearing his work gear today, his work clothing. He's wearing his work clothing. He's been working today. He works for Namdor. He does steel reinforcement. So anyways, they go on and on about how he likes his job. So we'll just skip this part for now. And if you want to pause it and read it yourself, go right ahead. But I'm going to pick up here where the defense lawyer says, the curfew is certainly not going to provide him any difficulties. Yeah, I would agree. Yeah, that curfew where, he has to stay home between 9:30 p.m. and 4:30 a.m. Yeah, that's probably not going to provide him any difficulties. While he's asleep, he can't leave his house. Woo. And as we get back into the transcript, the defense lawyer says, so it is a dated record, the criminal record, that is, at this point, Your Honor. And by the way, the record is admitted, but it is dated. There is a considerable gap there, Your Honor. And there is a considerable gap. His last conviction was 2014. This is happening in 2023. So there's 9 years where he didn't try to kill anyone. So that's good. And the defense lawyer says, I don't anticipate that there will be any difficulties for Mr. Sparks with the conditional sentence order or a term of probation. Spoiler alert, there's difficulties. Defense lawyer says, it's been almost 1 year since this incident. He's had no difficulties with police. There is no allegations of any breach yet, or any type of that behavior. So my respectful submissions, Your Honor, he will fare well on a conditional sentence order and a probation order if you impose it. And, well, that's basically it. So here's the sentencing. You guys ready for this? Here we go. Here's the sentencing. The judge asked Leslie, he goes, Mr. Sparks, is there anything you want to say? And Leslie says, no, sir. So Leslie doesn't want to apologize? Really? Okay. Well, he admits what he did was wrong. He admits he went too far. He admits he could have just gone the other direction. He admits what he did wasn't proportionate, but he doesn't want to apologize. Wow. What a fucking piece of shit. So the judge has to make a decision. Is Leslie going to get 30 days curfew or 45 days curfew? Well, here we go. Judge says, all right, there will be a 30-day conditional sentence order on the following conditions. You motherfuckers. Mr. Sparks, you must keep the peace and be of good behavior and attend court when required to do so. You must report in person to a conditional sentence supervisor at 1756 Island Highway, Colwood, British Columbia. That is in this building, no later than 4 p.m. today. You must report thereafter as and when directed by your supervisor. You must remain within British Columbia unless written permission to go outside British Columbia is provided by the court or your conditional sentence supervisor. And then they go over a bunch of stuff about the curfew and the curfew hours and what he can and can't do over the curfew hours. And then the judge says, you must not have any contact or communication directly or indirectly with Leslie Sparks. Huh? He can't have communication directly or indirectly with himself? So Leslie stands up and he says, I am Leslie Sparks. And the judge says, oh, I'm sorry, sir. Forgive me. Dan. You must have no contact or communication directly or indirectly with Dan. You must not approach within 10 meters of Dan, except within a courthouse in British Columbia. If you encounter Dan, you must leave his presence immediately, without any words or gestures. You must not go to any place which you know to be a place of residence, education, or employment of Dan. You must attend, participate, and successfully complete any counseling program to which you were referred to by your conditional sentence supervisor, which there never was. You must not possess or consume any intoxicating substances. You must not possess any weapons as defined by the criminal code, or any imitations thereof. That will be followed by a term of 1 year's probation. The conditions of the probation are these. You must report in person to a probation supervisor at 1756 Island Highway, Colwood, British Columbia, within 72 hours of the expiry of your conditional sentence. You must provide your probation officer with your residential address and telephone number and not change these without first notifying your probation officer. You must have no contact or communication directly or indirectly with Leslie Earl Sparks. I'm sorry, I seem to be getting a block. So he's screwed up the names again. With Dan, you must not approach within 10 meters of Dan, except within a courthouse, British Columbia. If you encounter Dan, you must leave his presence immediately, without any words or gestures. And he says to the prosecutor, Mr. Kuzma, did I look over anything? And Mr. Kuzma, the prosecutor, says, no, Your Honor. And this is where I should have stood up and said, restitution, you fucking idiot! But I didn't. So yeah, restitution. Let's see what I'm out. Well, I have to pay for an ambulance. That's $80. The hoodie that I was wearing, bought specifically for fishing online, that was like $30, $40. The gloves that I was wearing were never returned to me, so there's another $15. The fishing reel that Mr. Sparks broke was, say, $80. The chest harness that I was wearing to hold the body camera in place, that was cut off by paramedics. There goes $30. The camera, which sat seized in RCMP headquarters for a year after being dunked in salt water, that no longer works. That was $120. The knife that I pulled to defend myself was confiscated by the police, but never returned. So there's another $25. So you add all that up, and that should have been returned to me by Mr. Sparks himself via restitution. That's how the criminal justice system works. Someone fucks around and finds out and is pleading guilty to their stupidity, and they have to pay for all the damages they caused. But in this case, the prosecutor had no interest in me getting any restitution whatsoever. Nice, eh? So all those damages and the cost of the ambulance, that's all on me. So the judge says, all right. And the prosecutor said, that is all, except for the DNA order, which they then discussed the DNA order. And that's it, folks. It's a wrap. 30 days curfew while you're already asleep. That's what you get for obstructing, interrupting, interfering with Dan's lawful use of property. That's what you get for breaking his fishing reel. That's what you get for robbery. That's what you get for uttering threats. Quote, I'm gonna fucking kill you, unquote. And that's what you get for trying to kill Dan with a weapon. 30 days curfew for a guy who's got pages long of criminal convictions, a criminal record with very violent past. Wow. You guys try to think of a reason why they would have just let this guy off. Gee, I wonder why. Hey Leslie, how soon can you kill Dan? Because, yeah, if you did, we might give you another 30 days curfew. Wow. Well, hey, if you have any questions for the prosecutor, Oleh Kuzma, here's his email address right here. Here, I'll even spell it for you. It's OKUZMA at shaw.ca. Yeah, send him an email if you like. Hey, why not? He's retired. He's got lots of time to field your emails. So, what happens after this court hearing? What happens with Leslie's probation? Did he breach his probation? Did they ask Leslie how long it would take him to kill me? Find out in part 6, coming up sometime soon. Thanks for watching.
Well, in this day and age, when people that work for government agencies misuse people's personal private information.
So right now you're under arrest for obstruction.
Okay.
Okay. So you're being arrested now for obstruction. Okay. So, do you understand that?
I understand I'm being unlawfully arrested. That's what I understand.
So it's my
Yeah.
Yeah, you've got them on camera. And the judge specifically said any police officer who's acting in good faith and not doing anything wrong shouldn't be afraid of a camera or somebody recording them. Yeah, you've got them on camera. Hey, Greg. How's it going?
Give up, man.
Freedom enforcement. Yeah, you've got them on camera.